My name is Eugeniu Lupu, and I am a Romanian American citizen. I came to this second country of mine shortly after the fall of the communism in Romania, because I realized from the first year that the country's transition to capitalism will take several decades, and I wanted with all my heart to spend the rest of my life in freedom. Only a few years after the so-called revolution, all the former communists in the country's leadership seized power and got rich overnight doing all kind of unclean business. My eldest son had come here legally, and it was achieved quite quickly by continuing his profession as a church painter. Now, together with my entire family, we live happily, and we thank the American government from the bottom of our hearts for adopting us and helping us to live and work in this promised land. I regret that due to my health condition, I could not come to New York to participate in the opening of my exhibition, but with my mind and heart, I feel here among you. Photography and the movie, two miracles. I was born in the sign of Aries, and all my life I felt the delicate thread of the wings of my protecting angel, and I was following by a fortune that was difficult to believe and understand. The first miracle happened when I was 10 years old, thanks to a playmate who was 4 years older than me. One day after school, he pulled me in his house where he had a secret room to show me something that marked my life forever. His father was a photographer and had set up a dark room for him where he spent many nights. I was so impressed under the red light, watching in the tray with developer how a white paper turns into a human face, that even today, at 84 years old, I trembled with emotion when, in the basement of the house, I play with the enlarger and with the development solutions. Then, step by step, I climbed the hard road of fulfillment, and I never parted with my holy tools, cameras and filming machines. I learned very early that the world is not like a childhood fairy tales. In 1941, by order of Marshal Antonescu, my father in the Romanian army crossed the eastern border to liberate Basarabia, a territory that had been taken from us by Russia. He was captured and forced to work in the asbestos mine in the Ural mountain and in Siberia at Vladivostok. He was a prisoner in Russia for 10 years before he was able to return home. I was 11 years old at that time. When I became conscious and started my first job, I learned that the world is not like in childhood fairy tales. Year later, on my first day of work at the slide studio, my boss warned me to photograph only what I was allowed and gave me a list of what was forbidden. I confided this to my father, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, with a sign, "If you want to have a good, trouble-free life, you have to say like them and do like you." I listened to his advice and managed to sleep through all the serpentine danger and respect my purpose. Not infrequently, I jumped over the barbed wire fence, testing the bitter venom of risk. In the winter of 1985, finding out that the Vacarești monastery would be demolished by order of Ceausescu, and working as an image operator at the Alexandru Sahia studio, I felt an impulse that was difficult to control, and I asked for permission to film what was left standing in the holy place. At least an image of the largest and oldest church settlement in the eastern part of Europe will remain for later. The director of the studio, without looking me in the eye, only gave me a verbal approval and said that he does not take any responsibility. That if I want to take this risk of filming a forbidden area guarded by the Securitate, I should do only on my own responsibility. Of course, I couldn't sleep the following nights, especially since several colleagues reminded me that I had a wife and children. A kind of madness seized me. I was afraid, but I took comfort in a sense of blessedness I had since childhood. I was born under the sign of Aries and always felt the delicate wings of protective angel, a sense that I was followed by the fortune I thought that of nothing bad had happened to me by them. I will be lucky enough to have everything go well. I took those monastery photos and I filmed, and the angel saved me. The situation of the photographers. In Bucharest, the Association of Photographer Artists, AAF, had many members. This was only one place where we met the other photographers and talked freely about art and photography. We avoided very much talk about politics because we were sure there were some informers among us. We knew who they were because they started to talk about freedom, about capitalist countries, and about the situation of Romania, to provoke us. For some artists, being members was a big material advantage, because if a picture was published in a paper or magazine, it was considered like art, and the association paid very good money. The association got a lot of money from the government, but the artists needed to make propaganda for the Communist Party in exchange. There were three categories of artists. Most of them were opportunists and executed the government orders for propaganda without any problem of conscience. The second category compromised their artistic integrity by producing work for both the government and themselves, half and half. The last category had a very bad situation because they refused to compromise and so made no money from the government. To be honest, I was member of the second category, and for this reason I was able to travel to 15 countries and I had many opportunities to see the world. Only the artists from the second and third categories had opportunities to produce high-quality works of art because the association only selected non-political works for international competition and exposure. However, these artists were prevented from traveling in these competitions because the government punished them for their uncompromising positions. In 1971, I produced photograph at artwork for a small group of nonconformist artists. They were invited to submit their paintings, sculpture and graphic works to a gallery in Edinburgh. Belong to famous critic Richard De Marco, but because of censorship were unable to send the works. They sent only my photographs, black and white 18 by 24 cm, to put in a Romanian section of the gallery. This was an unprecedented event and never happened before in any gallery. In 1974, the studio sent me to film the visit of Korean foreign delegation meet Ceausescu in his cabinet in the building of the Committee Central of the Communist country. I went there a half hour earlier to shoot the location. I wanted to film the building from the gate of the former King's Palace to depict the ornamental structure of the architecture. I was stopped by the palace guard and arrested under the suspicion I was a foreign spy. Because of this, I was unable to complete the assignment. This was the type of situation artists were constantly confronted with under this communist regime. Photography in the political climate. In 1965, Ceausescu took power and for 33 years ruled Romania as an unscrupulous dictator. In the first period until 1971, some liberalization was allowed, but the end of 1989, Romania was a slave to the cult of personality inspired by Korea and China. Photography was in great demand, and everywhere you could meet children and people, both young and old, with cameras hanging from their necks. Most of the cameras were the old box types with 6 by 6 centimeters. But a few enjoyed the famous Russian Zorky camera, some copies not very successful after the German Leica ones. Professional photographers were luckier, worked with Rolleiflex, Exacta Varex and Hasselblad, and rarely with Linkoff Technica, all of which were bought by the government with hard currency. When I started working at the Dia film section of Alexandru Sahia's studio, I was wonderfully happy to work with these expensive cameras. In the 4 years middle school of cinematography, the photography teacher taught us that the greatest duty of a reporter is to respect the truth and never falsify reality. In everything I have done so far, I had tried to respect this principle, but one is the dream and another is the life. Falsifying reality was common under Romania communist regime. An elderly colleague explained me how objects and people can be modified in all ways with our cameras by changing the composition, framing, shooting, angle and light. From a dwarf you can make a giant, and vice versa. I was forced to make political figure goods. I learned that the Ceausescu photographers were retouched before they were published in mass circulation. For me, it was a torment to film the president because I was taller than him and had to hunch over a lot of front of him so that he would come out very imposing. A colleague from Acer Press took a lot of his photos kneeling as in front of him like being a saint. In many places in Romania, on the gates or walls or some buildings, it was written large letters, photography forbidden. And a few times I ended up in the police because I had not paid attention to the order. After graduating from the Institute of Theatre and Cinematography, Film Operation Department, 4 years, I was forced to make many documentary films that today I feel very ashamed of. So false and lying do they seem to me today. I fought with censorship and much as I could, but I was defeated by the envoys from the Central Committee of the Party, who looked like thugs and scared us when they came to the studio with their bags in their hands. A colleague, best director of the studio with Palme d'Or award from Cannes, came very close to being charged the cost to a film about irrigation, because he used in the film young women from the Madrigal choir dressing only in some perforated bags, almost naked, who danced on the ground cracked from the drought, praying to the sky for rain, as in the ancient theater when the gods were begged for help. In all films and photographers, it was forbidden to see crosses and other churches' icons, to a fanatical atheism of the political system. The only weapon against censorship I had at my disposal and used many times was play to full and film by mistake, in quotation marks, what was forbidden, knowing that these negatives will be not destroyed. I hope with all my heart and later in another era they could be used by the descendants as only proof of the true history of Romania. My relationship with artists. An unwritten studio law allowed directors and operators to choose from the thematic plan of films those that match their style and preferences. Because I knew the artist's life of Bucharest quite well, and I was in close relation with many artists, I chose especially fine arts films. Some of the films were about painters and sculptors living and working in the interwar period, and their art depicted both the rich and poor people and conditions that existed in that time. However, in the final cuts of this film, the censor chose only the art that reflected the poor, such as tired workers and squalid environment, because they wanted to film the film to prove how bad lives were during capitalism. Accordingly, among contemporary artists, those who worked in the socialist realist style, depicting happy conditions under socialism, were preferred by the government. I was received in the artist studio with a lot of goodwill, and they understood very well that I had to film or photograph only works that corresponded with the correct political point of view. But I was very careful to respect them, the artists, and I also filmed the artwork that did not obey the code, promising that I would fight for those to also appear in the movie. I knew that censorship could sometime be fooled. Political film depicted heroes of socialist labor, the so-called Stahanovists, those famous for exceeding the norm. Happy peasants from collective farms, clean miners in new uniform, as if they had never touched a piece of coal as black as hell. Censored, cut nude from the art films, and as if in socialism and communism children were made in a test tube. Everyone in this film had to smile as to full of joy and health. The sadness experience I had was a documentary film about a socialist woman in Romania, intended for propaganda abroad. This film was personally taken care by the first woman, Elena Ceausescu, from whom we received a list of 100 women from a social strata and covering a lot of professional position and traits. It was supposed to be 40 minutes long, and more than 50 operators and directors were sent all over the country to film it. When Elena viewed the film, she cut almost half of her heroines from it for apparently no reason, and much to our surprise, then we realized that the women cut only the young, beautiful, and dressed or styled according to the latest fashion in the country or abroad. The film was remade and included only serious, tired, unsung faces dressed like woe into the world. It was especially offensive to me and the artists because the beauty of the Romanian women was famous all over the world. Conclusion. I worked in Romania for 33 years, in 2 studios doing photos and short films. But I felt much better as a photographer because, unlike film, where you work in a team, and I didn't really feel like an author. Photography, however, gave me the satisfaction and quality of total author. To watch a movie or video, you need projection devices or a television. But photography has the enormous advantage that it can be received instantly and needed nothing more than to look at it. I was passionate about the human being, about portraits, and I tried to understand people, to read their character, their way of being, their emotional state, their thoughts, their condition, and their soul. I understood that I can't reproduce all these characteristics in a photo without having a strong sense of understanding and love for them. I approached them with friendship and respect, regardless of their social status, intelligence, and education. I never judge them, and in the end I managed to make honest and true, authentic and real portraits. Of course, I was helped by my psychology teacher at the college, and I studied many authors and books and dozens of volumes, especially Freud, Jung, and Adler, as well as Russian classical writers Dostoevsky, Chekhov, Tolstoy, and Gogol, being my true teachers. And last but the best photography magazine, Camera, in Germany, which published only black and white images, and I was artistically trained thanks to it. I also like color photography, but it is particularly difficult in a world oversaturated with colors to use a tight range of colors, and I have always preferred black and white photography with its finished sea, grace, surrealism, and graphics. I had the special chance to photograph and make a film to the best painter, a kind of Rembrandt of Romania, Corneliu Baba. He was also a highly appreciated teacher and trained a number of painters at great value. I also have a more special reason to leave the country and the film studio, because in the new condition, only in 3 years, it fell apart almost dissolved, and now out of the 450 employees in the 60s and the 90s, there are only less than 10 left. I managed here in the 34 years to organize 6 photography exhibitions and to take several tens of thousands of black and white and color photos. After work, especially on weekends, we went hunting pictures, and the harvest was beyond expectations. By making this exhibition, I set out to introduce the young generation to the most important Romanian artists of the communist period, who for me constitute the true golden generation.